Following your successful undertaking of the first phase of the BBI process, where your committee played a crucial role, and the subsequent gazettement of this validation process, Fort Kenya calls upon the task force to take firm charge of the process, as was the case before. We call upon the task force to ensure that the ordinary mwananchi, the Wanjiku, the Nafula, the Atieno, remain the central player and key driver of this process. The executive and political class must not be allowed, and this we emphasize, must not be allowed to hijack this process and turn it into a political campaign and contest for the next elections. This will make it look like a short-term fix for long-term challenges, and thus will not solve the problems the country has. Because if our eyes are on 2022, what happens the day after? And we want this process to bestow onto this country a constitution that can give leadership and direction for the next 20, 30, 40 years to come. Mr. Chairman, Fort Kenya also calls for the following improvements to the content and language of the report. In your earlier report, you used some very difficult English words that the ordinary Mama Mboga may not understand. I'm happy that you have now translated the document into Kiswahili, and the ordinary person will be able to read and understand. Mr. Chairman, Fort Kenya finds that the most pressing needs for the people of Kenya today includes high cost of living with increasing poverty leading to growing crime, growing youth unemployment levels, and unsustainable public debt. For the coronavirus place additional stress on the Kenyan society. Consequently, the family unit is under threat, and our general peace and security as a nation is also in jeopardy. We make the following proposals, Mr. Chairman, on the thematic areas we have picked, and we start with the issue of divisive elections. Mr. Chairman, the worry in this country is not just limited to the voting exercise. This begins with the entire process of registration and issuance of national identity cards. Deliberate actions by the executive to deny certain regions an opportunity to access ID cards in a timely and expeditious manner is a matter of concern. Mr. Chairman, you used to be our PC in Western, and my colleague Amos Wako can tell you, for frontier counties like Bungoma, Busia, Trans Nzoia, Pokot, getting an ID is a nightmare. For you to access an ID, and in Kenya today, an ID is virtually everything. You cannot access social safety net resources from the state without an ID. You can't open a bank account. You cannot enter a supermarket. You cannot do anything without an ID. And yet, when you come to those areas, and many other frontier areas, including where you, Chairman, come from, to get an ID, you are asked questions that no ordinary person may even remember. You are asked even who your great-great-grandfather was, a title deed, and all manner of things which are not asked in other parts of the country. And these levels of discrimination lead to denial of the right to vote, because you can't register as a voter without an ID. The entire voter management exercise, including voter education and awareness, needs to be relooked at. Of equal concern is the perceived executive interference in the voter management process, including the process of procurement of voter materials, actual voting exercise, tallying, and result transmission. As previously stated by the Supreme Court of Kenya in the 2017 presidential petition and echoed by the Malawi courts recently, the process is as important as the results. Fort Kenya calls for the speedy implementation of the recommendations of the Kriegler report, as well as Article 86 of the Constitution of Kenya with respect to the management of elections. The parties against the cosmetic recommendations contained in your BBI first report, Chapter 5 of paragraph 88, which gives very blanket victimization of IEBC staff, commissioners, removing the requirement that the chair be a lawyer. Fort Kenya believes that the chair of IEBC should be a person fit to be a judge of the High Court. And of course, you also propose vetting of staff, among other things. Fort Kenya further calls for a thorough review and audit of the performance of the relevant constitutional bodies and state agencies with a view to restructuring them to make them more effective. In fact, Mr. Chairman, the Constitution 2010 created too many constitutional commissions that must be relooked at and rationalized and reduced as necessary. Some of them are in competition with existing institutions of government, and in the process they cause confusion and slow down service delivery. Mr. Chairman, presently, and this is on representation, the Kenyan electoral system is the first past the post model, where the candidate who receives the most votes wins, even if such a candidate did not receive the majority of votes. More often than not, such a candidate takes it all in terms of power and authority, leaving a significant number of voters feeling unrepresented and disenfranchised. Fort Kenya proposes a one-man, one-vote system, popularly known as proportional representation, and at some stage, Mr. Chairman, our Secretary General will highlight on this matter, because he's one man who feels very passionate about it. This system of one man, one vote is practiced in over 2/3 of democracies worldwide, and Kenya should not be an exception. In this system, Mr. Chairman, all votes attained by a political party in an election are a factor in the consideration of the overall political results and a determinant in the post-election sharing of positions and resources. It is not just about the winning candidate, but the overall performance of the political party. This will also help strengthen the role and place of political parties in our democracy. Mr. Chairman, the government to put in place appropriate mechanisms to ensure that adequate and timely funding follows all the devolved functions. The Constitution is very clear that resources must follow functions to wherever they are domiciled. This includes healthcare, Mr. Chairman, which is having serious difficulties currently. And as we look at the profile of our country, Mr. Chairman, 3 critical functions, namely health, agriculture, and water, that are the basis for human sustainability, are substantially devolved, but without proportionate resource flows. Fort Kenya recommends, Mr. Chairman, that not less than 20% of the annual development budget in the counties be shared equitably amongst the wards in those counties. Fort Kenya also proposes that we enact an appropriate legal framework to strengthen and safeguard regional economic blocks within the devolution family, and Fort Kenya does not support any creation of a third-tier devolved system in the country. We want to strengthen what we have and have 2 levels of government: the national government and the devolved units, which are at liberty to form economic blocks and strengthen their economies depending on the commonality of interests. On inclusivity and shared prosperity, Chairman, Fort Kenya wants to ensure that a law is enacted to safeguard implementation of the constitutional and policy requirements of inclusivity across the public service, and not just in appointive or elective positions. I've already given you the example of Malaysia. Mr. Chairman, you'll realize that in our country today, when people talk about inclusivity, we all narrow our prism to who is in the cabinet, who is a PS, who is an ambassador, forgetting that there's a very small percentage of public service, that as you cascade downwards, there are many, many, many disproportionate appointments in government that do not reflect the face of our country, and that is not good. Fort Kenya, Mr. Chairman, proposes affirmative action for protection of minorities at both levels of government that have no chance of winning competitive seats under obtaining circumstances. For example, Mr. Chairman, you cannot envisage any situation where an El Molo will become elected as a member of parliament either on the Turkana side or the Marsabit side. You can't imagine any situation where an El Molo will become a governor of Marsabit or where a Kuria, for example, will become a governor of Migori. So we want affirmative action to ring fence the interests of these minorities, to give them a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership, and above all, a sense of participation in the politics and life of our country. By having them affirmatively nominated to county assemblies, because what is happening today is nominations are the preserve of political parties. And if those minorities don't belong to your party, you have no business even considering them. So we need to have them insulated and be given those opportunities. In the sports and entertainment sectors, because there's need for greater focus and investment in the promotion, commercialization of sports, culture, and entertainment industries, and this will help our young people develop and nurture their talents and earn a living. On corruption, Mr. Chairman, our country is suffering from serious political and moral corruption. Corruption erodes public trust and results in wastage of resources that would otherwise be applied towards improved government programs and development projects. Corruption has eaten away the physical and moral fabric of our country and has denied Kenyans proper service provision, culminating in a substantial negative effect on Kenya's quality of life. Fort Kenya makes the following recommendations with respect to corruption. There ought to be greater commitment and respect for the rule of law and the constitutionalism in our country. We recommend as Fort Kenya, Mr. Chairman, that we make aggravated corruption a capital offense. We are deliberately using the word aggravated corruption, Chairman, because if we leave it open, the judicial system that we have today and the management of our public affairs, you'll find we'll be hanging police constables for picking a few shillings from travelers, and the real fellows who sit in white-collar offices and work for themselves instead of the people of Kenya go scot-free. We want to recommend, Chairman, that we strengthen the institutions of governance, including the Office of the Auditor General, the Control of Budget, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, the Judiciary, and other investigative arms of government. Restitution, Mr. Chairman, of public resources and state confiscation of proceeds of corruption after due process will greatly assist in boosting the war against corruption. Mr. Chairman, we recommend as a party that curriculum orientation in our institutions is an absolute imperative to inculcate in the minds of our people, especially the youth, that corruption is not a career, but a ruinous and antisocial criminal conduct that